today's webinar. This is part 3 of our series, Native Connections Approach. My name is BC Echohawk, and I'm a member of the Pawnee Nation of Oklahoma. On behalf of the Native Connections team and contracting officer representatives Maureen Madison and Jan Dunbar Cooper, thank you all for joining us. We'll be talking about the importance of planning your strategic action plan. Please feel free to share your thoughts and comments. You can use the raise hand function and we'll call on you to unmute your microphone and comment. Also, feel free to enter questions or comments in the chat box anytime during the session.
Again, I would like to welcome you to the third part in a 4-part series of the Native Connections Approach. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Sharon Eagleman, and I'm a member of the Fort Peck, Assiniboine, and Sioux tribes of Montana, and also from the Little Traverse Bay Band of Ottawa Indians from Michigan. I'm a grantee technical assistant, and I live in Lawrence, Kansas. And I will ask the GTA presenters to introduce themselves, starting with Deborah, followed by Elwood, and then Elma.
Okay, well, thank you, Sharon. Hi, my name is Deborah Bradler. I'm a Gros Ventre from North Central Montana, and I currently reside in Spokane, Washington, and I've been a GTA for quite a while, and so I'm really looking forward to this webinar today. So I will pass this over to Elwood.
Thank you. My name is Elwood Pipestem Ott, grantee technical assistant of Oto and Comanche, residing in Lawrence, Kansas. Elma?
So my name is Elma Brown. I'm Northern Arapaho from the Wind River Indian Reservation in Wyoming. And so I'm looking forward to being a part of this webinar today. Thank you.
Thank you, Elma. So the topic of this webinar is to describe and stress the importance of the strategic action plan that you are asked to develop. The strategic action plan, also called the SAP, is the foundation of your program. During this webinar, we will define and demonstrate the use of a logic model in the planning of your SAP. We will also demonstrate how to use the community systems analysis and community readiness model as tools that, along with this logic model, will assist you in the development of your SAP. And then to wrap things up, we will review the importance of community engagement and youth participation. So in each of our webinars, we've discussed the Native Connections approach, and this graphic is a visual representation of the approach. In part 1 of this 4-part series, we explained the Native Connections approach and how it utilizes the strategic prevention framework and its concepts. And we also discussed how we use the principles of GONA, GOAN, which are the gathering of Native Americans and gathering of Native Alaskans. We also reviewed networking opportunities provided to grantees that include Native Connections webinars, national learning communities, regional learning communities, regional site visits, and buddy matches. In the second webinar, in part 2 of the series, we explained how the community systems analysis, the CSA, guides us to see existing relationships within the community. We summarized the community readiness model, the CRM assessment, and how to apply the 6-dimension scores. We illustrated how to incorporate the CSA and CRM scores into the strategic action plan. So just real quick, when we look at the Native Connections graphic, the community systems analysis is in the assessment phase. This is where grantees map and measure their community's strengths by identifying resources and programs in their community and surrounding areas. This information assists grantees in determining how ready the community is for change when it comes to prevention. And this data collected is part of the foundation for planning. And then next we have capacity. In this phase, grantees learn how to use the community readiness model assessment to measure your community's readiness for change. And then grantees will use that data collected to develop goals, objectives, and activities for the SAP that matches your community's level of readiness to act. So in the planning phase, grantees use the assessment data to lay the foundation. Planning in this phase includes community partnerships and youth engagement. And this also helps grantees build capacity in developing policies and procedures. So this is where we begin to develop the strategic action plan. And the SAP is a foundation of the SAP is the foundation of this program, and it helps you make your vision for change a reality, and it maps the way to where you want to go.
Mhm.
So now I will turn this over to Deborah.
Okay. Oh, thank you, Sharon. And thank you, Marty, for that wonderful opening that you did for us. I think that really laid like the foundation for where we want to go with this webinar. And, Sharon, for really thank you for reviewing in what we did in part 1 and part 2 webinars, because that really does, help us see that this is a process that we're going through with you as we move through, each of these sections. And on this slide here, why is planning important? Like Marty said, planning, if you don't do some planning, you're not going to get anywhere. You're just going to kind of be pedaling in the same place and just wondering why you're not getting results. But if you take the time to plan, and this could be not just with Native Connections, your grant, but this also translates into your daily life too, and how you just, move forward, with your children, with your families and stuff. We all have to do some kind of planning to get us where we want to go. And if you take the time to really think about planning, you are going to get the results that you want. This time that you take to plan will really help you to, set up your program for success. In Native Connections, the first year is always focused on laying a solid foundation for your program. There are so many new processes to get to know, just like what, Sharon kind of reviewed for you with the first 2 webinars. So many of you are still in the process of getting your program set up. You're hiring staff, you're getting your offices off the ground. You're really starting to, take care of those SAMHSA requirements that you got with your NOA. And then here you are, you have these GTAs that are working with you to really, try to keep you moving forward. So on this slide here, you're going to see a lot of different points here, about how planning can help you. Why is this important? And as you read through this list that we have on here, maybe some of these are, things that you already do that you are, pointing you towards success. Maybe some of these are new to you, but when you take all of these points into consideration, they're going to help you be successful in what you're doing. One of the things I wanted to explain on our slides that we're doing here, all of these points that we have up here, these are all points that the GTAs have heard from their grantees as what has helped them move forward. So, these are not just lists that we come up with, for the webinar. We really take into consideration what we've heard from you, all of the grantees, so that we can share that with everybody. Sharon had talked about the importance of networking, and I think we covered that in part 1. But when we network with you, when we work with you, we want to make sure that we're moving all this information back out to you in a timely manner. So as you read through these points here, about why planning is important, really take some time to really, think about how you can, really use these in your planning process. Sharon, I know you've been with, your grantees for, for quite a while. Have you used any of these points that we have on this slide, with your grantees as you've helped them plan? What have you, how have they been responding to them?
So I have one grantee in Oklahoma, and I feel like it was helpful to him to be able to break things down, because we discussed that about how when you develop a goal, then what are the objectives? What objectives fall under there? How are those broken down? Activities, and then who is responsible for what? And I feel like, I believe that he knew he was already implementing some of these things, but it really helped him to get this down on paper so that it was laid out and clear for the staff that he worked with, so they were on the same page, and then they could go talk to their community and people to get them interested in their activities and let them know what their program was doing.
Mhm. Okay, well, thank you for that. Yes. So I think, that's one of the things that we hear back from, the other GTAs and from the grantees is that when you put it on paper, when you can take it out of your head and put it on paper and really see it, then that really does make a difference and help you move forward. The next slide, please. Okay. Okay, Mark. Next slide. Okay, so again, looking at this slide here, how can the logic model help you plan, with your program? Introducing a simple, to me, the logic model process, it can be as simple or as complex as you want to make it. But in the end, it will really help you plan out your program. How many of you have used a logic model? One of the things, at the beginning, BC talked about the chat box. We'd really like to hear from you. Let us know in the chat box if you've used any type of logic model in your program. Has it helped you? And one of the things about a logic model, and I think this is where I really want to drop back into our daily life. A logic model is simply a sequence of actions. You identified an issue, and when you really start looking at the sequences, it's going to lead you to a solution. That's a logic model. I think everybody here has used this logic model process. We all use it every day, and you probably don't even realize that you're doing it. But again, it looks different when you actually put it down on paper. The logic model, again, it can really help you to really get the thinking out of your head and onto paper, and it can help you express what you want to do. It'll help you express your thinking. Where do you want to go with it? One of the things that we talk about a lot in this program is SMART: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. When you use a logic model, that can really help you to put that SMART format on paper so you can really see where that's going to go. And we'll discuss that a little bit more further on in this webinar. But again, a logic model on paper, on your computer, it provides a structure for your thinking so that as you implement your program, as you're working towards completing a goal or you're working towards your vision statement, it's going to help you with that process. So as you move through this program using a logic model process, whether you do this in your head, in a sequence of events, or you put it on paper, in the end, it's just going to help you with your planning process so that you're going to be successful in what you're doing. And again, Sharon, just looking at some of these steps here with some of your grantees, have any of them done any of this with, in your TA sessions with them?
I think one of the best examples that I can think of is with this grantee. I think a part of developing the policies, procedures, and protocols, I believe it felt a little overwhelming to him because grantees may think they need to recreate the wheel. And we laid out some goals for him about revising and updating policies and procedures for monitoring progress. Let's see. Monitoring progress and evaluating ongoing needs and concerns. So we wanted to increase capacity to develop data for suicide prevention and substance misuse for the youth in the community. So say, for example, we broke it down for him that he could, if his objective from that goal is to identify, revise, and update protocols to promote coordination for helping students at risk of suicide, including those transitioning youth. So we broke that down as to saying that he could identify the local protocols that were out there regarding transitioning youth in care, and he could review the protocols that he gathered and determine how to update and proceed. And then he could create a flow chart for distribution. So that's similar to what we're talking about here. And again, it was easy once we talked it out. And then once we provided a structure for him to be able to implement this. So that would be the example that I would have.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Let's see, can we go to the next slide, please? You know, again, I'm going to come back to this question a few different times in this webinar. Why create a logic model? But I think when we really look at this logic model process, we did provide a logic model template for you. It should be in your chat box so you can, follow along with it. This is, we've got four main points on this slide here that will help you with, in your planning so that you are strategic, so that you are using your time, moving forward with what you're doing. And a logic model is really going to help you be consistent because you're going to hear from your GTAs and your GPOs, we talk about outcomes, your outputs, you'll be hearing about that, in our next webinar and on this webinar also. But using a logic model process will really help you to really solidify that so that you know what your outcomes are going to be. And it provides a quick snapshot of your program. I've seen some logic models that are all visual, that are really impactful in how they used their creative processes to really diagram out where they want to go with their program. So you can be as creative as you want with a logic model. You don't need to be constrained by just, again, we put a template in the chat box. That's just to get you started. Move forward from that and really make this your own, be creative with it, get your youth involved in helping you with it. Because, when you start explaining your program back to youth, your leadership or whatever, a logic model is really a simple way to do that. And it will really help you when you're presenting this to other people. So let's kind of dive into a logic model. Let's look at this on our next slide, please. Okay. Now this logic model that we put up here, again, I'm just doing this as easy as possible, because I know there are people on this webinar that are very, very experienced with a logic model. And there are other ones that maybe this is the first time you've really seen this, and are really going to be taking an attempt to do this with your GTA. But, again, this is just there's only 5 steps in this. And again, I'm going to say that you probably do this every day and you're not even realizing that you do this. So let's just kind of look at this example that we have here. Again, this logic model is beginning on the left side where you're going to identify a problem. And so on this one here, the problem I identified was a headache. How many of us get it? We all get headaches sometime, somehow. You can get a tension headache from working too much, not taking a break. Maybe you're getting a headache because you didn't eat for 4 or 5 hours and your body's telling you, hey, you need to take a break. I'm going to give you a headache to remind you to feed me. Maybe you get a migraine headache, But one of the things about a headache is something that we all do, is you have to diagnose what kind of headache you have because there's so many different kind of medicines out there that you want to take. So you have a headache. That's the problem. You need to take some kind of headache medications. That's going to be the activity. So you're still deciding what it is. So let's say it's a tension headache. Okay, for me, when I take Tylenol, I know that my headache will probably be gone within an hour. So that's going to be my resource, my input. I'm going to take those 2 Tylenols and within an hour, my headache should be gone. So what's my short-term output there? Like I said, my headache's gone in an hour. And what's the long-term outcome? I'm going to feel better, but it's also going to be a reminder that, hey, I need to take more breaks during the day so I don't get a tension headache in the first place. So this example is just really simple, but I just want to illustrate to you that you do think like this every day. GTAs see this with you as we do our TAs, TA sessions with you. I think the GPOs see this. So the big thing is that I put it on paper and I diagrammed it in this 5-step process. This is a logic model. So let's move on to our next slide and kind of look at it from a strategic action plan perspective. In this sample, the problem, it's suicide awareness. You want to increase that. Again, Sharon had talked a little bit about, in one of our previous webinars, we really talked about how important it is to really align your CRM scores with your goals and objectives. In this one here, you want to increase suicide awareness. That's the issue that you're going to be working with. That's the problem. Maybe your score is a 1 or 2. And so that's what you've written into your strategic action plan. That's going to be a strategy. You're going to increase suicide awareness. So how are you going to do that? One of the activities that we see with our grantee strategic action plans is that a lot of you develop a brochure. But to develop that brochure, it takes some time to do that. So if that's going to be one of your activities or one of your strategies that you're going to be doing, that could be what you have on that column in the strategic action plan. You're going to develop and distribute suicide prevention information. And so your inputs, your resources, what does that look like for you? Maybe some of the things that you have to consider going back to that SMART format, staff, who's going to develop it? A lot of your Native Connections programs are just 1 or 2 people. Maybe you're the one that's going to be doing this. So you have to think about the time, who's going to do it? How much time is it going to take you to develop that brochure? And I think for a lot of you that have done this, it takes more than 1 hour to develop a really solid brochure. So you also have to think of the materials that you're going to use. Maybe the materials are going to be, once you develop it on the computer, you have to think about, what that message is going to be. What are you going to be telling them? How are you going to be printing that out? So, really look at the outcome, the short-term process of this. Once you get that brochure developed, the short term is that's going to increase the knowledge and understanding of suicide, depending on what the message is that you have on your brochure. What is your long-term outcome? And your long-term outcome, you might not see that until next year, or maybe the year after when you do another CRM. But again, that's going to increase your reach. That's going to increase, really raising that suicide awareness level in your community. Maybe on your brochure, you put, resources that are available that you've identified. Maybe you're not really going to know for a while yet, that long-term outcome is going to be that people are going to be accessing those resources more because of that one brochure that you did. So that could be, one way that you really can look at how you use an objective in your strategic action plan to really detail out where you want to go with this. What is going to be your outcomes? Next slide, please. And so again, going back to your, inputs and your resources, and this goes right back into your SMART format. The information that you're most likely to consider when you're developing your strategic action plan. And again, in that example I just went through in that previous slide, a brochure example, there's a lot more to developing that brochure than just sitting down and saying, hey, we're going to develop this and have it, think that it doesn't just appear. There's a lot of work that goes into those. I've seen some fantastic brochures that my grantees have shared with me. When I talk to them, how did you do that? What platform did you use? Canva. A lot of our grantees use Canva. But there's also design software out there that they use also that some grantees, some places do have access to. Your phones, your iPhones, they also are ways that you can use. You can do editing. You can do so many things with your iPhone now and these cell phones that we have. You can run your whole program off some of these phones. And there's so many other apps out there that you can use to design your brochures and your other things with. There are just too many to list on here. So maybe in the chat box, you can put in there, what are some of the ways that you have developed, some of your resources? What platforms have you used? In time, sometimes I don't think we really give ourselves enough time to really sit down and plan something out and to develop it. Developing this webinar, this takes us an average of like 8 weeks to develop a webinar to get to today, to where we can do this live. There's a lot of different moving parts that go into this. There's a team to manage. Like you see on our webinar today, Sharon is on here, Elwood, Elma, you heard BC, you heard Mark. Those are just 5 of us that are doing here today, this doesn't take into account the people behind the scenes that help us. And so when we're developing something, you have to really think about the bigger picture here and what it's all going to take to really get to that finished product. What is the message? What is the format? If you're doing a brochure, who's going to help you with it? Who's going to, QC it for you? Who's going to provide you pictures for it? Where's it going to get printed? So there's a lot of things that you have to consider when you're really looking at the time it takes to do something. What about your materials? On our webinar today, there should be 5 downloads altogether for you. And it's taken time to get all of 5 of those together for you. And I think all of ours are pretty much in color. We really hope that you do download those and use those in your process. But there's a lot of planning that goes into really making something happen. And that's what you do when you're planning your activities. But a logic model can really help you make sense of the steps along the way so that what you do create is achievable, it's relevant. Again, going back to our SMART format. So, is there anything in the chat box? I think we've been inviting people to put some comments in the chat box. I can't see the chat box when I'm presenting.
No, we're looking pretty good. We're looking pretty good, Deborah.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, let's go on to the next slide, please.
Well, Deborah, if I can interrupt, sorry, this is BC. There were a couple of comments. So Carrie, Kimsey, and Sarah noted also really supports the use of Canva. And I know that that's one that a lot of folks out there are using. It's very user-friendly and puts together some nice things. And then Nancy Nelson noted that she likes to use PowerPoint to make posters. And I think I'd like to know how she does that. And she's working on learning a new program called Microsoft Designer. So there are a number of things out there that folks can use and, ask your colleagues about them. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for that. Okay, Sharon.
Thank you, Deborah.
There you go.
When I look at this slide and when we were talking about the use of a logic model, I shared with Deborah that I was not that familiar with it, but in our planning meetings, I said this, when I look at this as a whole, it makes me think of like a good coach. And I shared that if you were to think about what makes a good coach, what comes to mind? And so for me, I think about how a coach communicates with his players, and then how do they communicate with each other when they're out, say on the court or, in the field. And I just think that they will look like they're all on the same page. To me, that's easy to see when you're watching a game. And that's to me what this kind of, it fits. It helps me to understand this logic model and how your community readiness assessment scores align with your SAP, because we don't want to, you're given strategies for each of the dimensions, and we want to recognize and work with the community where they are at. So we don't want to use a strategy that is at a different stage, because then it may not be successful. So this helps us, this logic model helps us figure that out. It just is another tool to use in addition to the CSA and the community readiness model assessment scores, to help develop and align with your strategic action plan. Did anybody else have anything to add? Okay. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think just looking at, aligning a CRM dimension score in the SAP, that can be really tricky sometimes, because I think it can be difficult sometimes to really decide what what you're going to do. Because I think there's so many ideas out there that people come up with when they're developing what it is they're actually going to do. That's what I like about these logic models is you can put it all in there. Put all your ideas in there in the inputs and resources, make a really long list, and then take the time to go back and decide what is really attainable. What can you actually do? Because I think we want to do so much for our community. We want to raise that awareness that suicide is preventable, that we have to really stop and think sometimes, what can I actually do in this quarter? What can I do this month? You know, and then when you're really looking at the activities that you're actually going to do, that's probably going to be a lot less than what you actually had in that original list. But keep your logic models for future reference, because you never know when you're going to want to, really review again what you started with, and maybe start pulling those again in the second or third year or the fourth year, so that you can really make your program as well-rounded as you want it to be. So that will help. Thank you.
Next slide, please. Then we'll hear from Elwood.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that. So you see on the slide is what the top front page of the CSA and the CRM looks like. So the community system analysis, just a reminder, as we talked about in previous parts of this series, it's a community mapping tool that you fill out and maintain over the life of the grant. This tool is developed to help you capture and track local data, the people, places, partnerships, funding systems, and so much more to help you take this journey. Regularly updating this data ensures that you'll stay up to date on the assets that enrich programming and contribute to your strategic action plan. So the community readiness models they talked about, with the information gained in terms of dimensions and overall readiness, you are now ready to develop strategies that will help or that will be appropriate for your community. This may be done in a small group or community workshop format. Next slide, please. The strategic action plan template. Now, I want to encourage you all to personalize this. Add your own photos, add your logos. Oh, this is just a tool, but it can be catered or designed or adapted to what fits your organization, your vision, and your advisory board thoughts. So the SAP should be created by an advisory board, and building this advisory board should be a top priority for the grantees. Strategic action plans are powerful. The SAP can harness diverse services and systems that come into contact with the youth and the families that we serve, and into a coordinated circle of care and a safety net of caring adults that communicate and work together. A SAP focus the energy and resources and time of everyone involved in the same direction. Also would like to encourage you all that the strategic action plan and the efforts and the goals and everything that we're going to talk about is not falling all on your shoulders. I encourage you all to also lean in with your advisory group and help encourage them to lead with some of the efforts. SAP development is a process that will take time. And next slide, please. All right, the strategic action plan checklist. This is also available on the Native Connections resource dashboard. So what you'll need is the community readiness assessment scores. Now this is going to be used to help with developing the goals, outcomes, and the strategic action plan. Thank you, Sarah. She put in the chat, get your advisory board involved. Yes, I second that. Focus on 2 or 3 of the lowest scoring CRM dimensions identified. Utilize that CSA to help with keeping track of everything. It's going to help with, if you decide to also reapply, it's going to help with sustainability or other grant funding, or reporting up to, tribal leaders
Mhm.
for more funding or more efforts. All right, next slide, please. Oh, thank you, Mark. So some of the key elements: visions, goals, objectives, activities, outcomes, and so much more. These are also things that you're going to need to help develop the SAP, and we're going to go into those a little more in depth with actually the next slide. The vision. So why are we taking the action? What's your vision? The vision statement shows what your community will look like when the problem detailed in the problem statement is addressed. You could draw this out, write out a vision statement. It should be clear and inspirational, as it will drive your strategic action plan. It should address the areas funded by the grant. Next slide, goals. These are long-term accomplishments that you move toward your vision. Goals are less structured and less concrete than the objectives. Revisit your original proposal, goals, and adjust to it if need be. But use your original goals as a starting point. Each year of the grant, try to develop no more than 5 goals, and feel free to carry some larger goals across the number of years. Part of the goals is going to embody strength-based principles, consider trauma-informed approaches, and more importantly, also specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound stuff. SMART. Utilize it. We're going to talk about that again a little bit down the road in this presentation, but it'll also help you feel a little more relaxed about it.
Mhm.
Thank you. Objectives. Each goal should have several objectives or steps needed to achieve the goal. Objectives are smaller, bite-sized goals that are short-term and help reach the long-term goal. They usually have a scope and can be achieved through a series of activities. And activities are the concrete steps, the phone calls, the meetings, the direct services, the events, voting, producing a report, mentoring, that help accomplish an objective. And thank you, the activities. Now that we have our vision, goals, and objectives written out, we're ready to get into the action of our action plan. Activities are the action steps of your objectives. These are the concrete steps. This is where we are able to develop step-by-step manageable actions. When will each activity be done? Who will do it? Who will lead? Who will coordinate? Who will be responsible? I think sometimes we also don't plan enough with the activities in such a way of when will our supplies be ordered? And I think sometimes we put dates of events and we don't add those little extra steps to it. It just makes things a little easier or a smoother process. You know, and then assign 1 or 2 people who's going to be responsible for, let's say, for example, ordering the supplies. Who's going to be responsible for marketing the event on either flyers, social media, or creating that, what was it word? Microsoft poster creator, the Canva, who's going to do all that? You know, don't do it all alone. I know sometimes we wear many hats and we feel like we're doing the work alone, but lean on that advisory group. Lean on other departments that we're networking with. We're going to help with some of the event. Collaboration. So that's my thoughts on it. Next step or next slide. All right, making objectives and activities better. Woo. So try to include cultural-based objectives and activities. This is a perfect spot, perfect place to get youth involved in planning, or engaging, or even marketing the events that we're going to do, or the things that we have planned out. The other thing I said, I think we can include elders, our language speakers, crafters, you know, other projects that are happening among the tribe. Whether it's like a canoe journey, culture camps, agriculture, planning, or even learning or teaching, elders and youth about types of plants and their use and their origin and their purpose within the community. Next slide, please. All right, here we go again with SMART. I'd also like to mention color coding these. I didn't realize the value in it until I started utilizing it, and it helps. And it helps me to determine whether my goals and objectives are actually following that SMART principle. Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound. This is also another way that you can share it with your advisory board or those that you're collaborating with. Sometimes we all learn and see things different. So this is another way of being able to explain it and hitting all the check boxes that we're following that principle. Yeah, Sarah said it in the chat, color coded. Pick your colors, but stay consistent with those colors. Don't be mixing it all up. Might confuse everything. But talk about ways to make or write objectives, write better objectives, and considering risk and protective factors, being strength-based.
So Elwood,
Go
can I
ahead,
add-
Sharon.
Yeah, I'd like to add something.
Please
Well,
do.
Just some thoughts. I agree that when I first started learning about the SMART format, I think it really did help, as you said, seeing it color coded, and then just because I feel like you already know what you're going to do, but these are just like a checklist to help you make sure that. So with the specific, for example, does it clearly state so that anyone who's reading it can understand what will be done and who will do it? We're trying to be that specific. So define what you expect. And so for attainable, that's making sure you have the time, the manpower, the people to help, the resources to accomplish that objective. And it also helps you take into consideration if there are any factors out there that are beyond your control. And also I wanted to mention too that when we talk about the relevant aspect of the SMART format, it's asking yourself, will this activity or program, will this help us meet the purpose of our grant? And also, is it aligned? Is this activity or program, is it aligned with our community readiness assessment scores and the strategies that are offered for each dimension? I think that's all I was going to add.
Okay, Elwood, I had a comment to add also. One of the things about really making your objectives SMART is, think about your SPARS indicators that you have to report on quarterly. When you really start making your objectives SMART, putting them in a format that you really understand, like green, it's measurable, participants of all ages. I know many of your Native Connections grants, you're breaking this down even further into specific age groups. Maybe it's from, 11 to 15, 15 to 18, 18 to 24, and you're really putting your thoughts in how you're going to be measuring things. But again, this will help you with your, gather the information that you need to report every quarter with your indicators. And having your objectives SMART like this, that makes it so much easier. And then when you put it in that, when you really break it down even further into a logic model, you're going to get really specific on what you're going to be able to report, quarterly. So thank you. That's it.
Oh, anyone else? If not, we're going to move right on to the next slide. All right. So goals for year one, they're foundational. They've been predetermined in the Native Connections FOA by SAMHSA. These goals guide you in developing a strong foundation for the years to follow. One of the year one goals is to integrate SAMHSA strategic prevention framework as a planning process for preventing substance use and misuse. You're already doing much of this by following your strategic action plan template.
Mhm.
And the 5, hire good staff, include community, policies and procedures, work with the GPO, GMSs, and us GTAs. We're here to help. Just send us an email, call us, or bring it up on one of our calls. The effectiveness of the SPIF begins with a clear understanding of community needs and involves community members at all stages of the planning process. You're doing this with your advisory board. Deborah, you got anything on this one?
No, I think you covered everything, because I think what Sharon had kind of reviewed this a little bit, and I think we always are going to be putting the SPIF in there because, again, we all follow this. I think GTAs, grantees, we always try to make sure that we're including all these petals in the TA that we provide. So thank you. Mhm.
Next slide. We'll turn it over to Elma.
Thank you, Elwood. So our next slide is talking about the power of community. Community engagement is a powerful vehicle for bringing about behavioral changes that will improve the health of your community. And communities must be at the heart of any public health innovation. Not only are those quotes powerful, but they ring true. It is so important to involve your community in all aspects of the grant. As you know, the Native Connections grant, when awarded, specifically states that community must be involved in all steps, in all stages, including the planning and implementation. And so that expectation is for the entirety of the grant. Sarah, would you like to expand on this?
Thank you, Elma. I'll just add that youth are a big component of that request within the Notice of Funding Opportunity. Youth are part of the community, so that it's really important to involve them in the planning and development and implementation of your activities. So reach out to youth. Thanks, Elma.
Thanks, Sarah. Next slide. So a lot of the next slides are going to be a series of questions and trying to engage you, our audience. So in the chat box, please let us know if you're a new or returning grantee, what cohort you're a part of. And do you have anything to add to this part, Deborah?
Yeah, I think we do have a number of new grantees that are brand new to Native Connections, and I think one of the things that we really try to emphasize here is how much some of our grantees from the other cohorts can really help them, and I think that's why we always include this question on our webinars, because cohorts 5, 6, 7, and 8 can really provide a lot of good information to some of our brand new grantees that are just learning this whole process. And so I think it's always good, if I'd invite you to really write in the chat box, are you a new grantee? Is this all new information to you? And for our returning grantees, grantee buddies are a big part of our program. And, pairing you up with another grantee, to really help you, on a peer-to-peer process really benefits, everybody. So, I can see Carrie Kimsey, you're a returning grantee. Maya Berger, she's cohort 9. Nancy Nelson, she's cohort 9 also, brand new. And she wants to be we're going to be pairing you up with a buddy, Nancy, because I know that you are going to be, you do want to learn from another grantee. So this really helps us, to really look at doing these buddy matches. And also, as we always, our title, Native Connections, those connections are important for us also to make, grantee to grantee, GTA to grantee. So again, Emma Faust in the chat box, she's a returning grantee from a previous cohort. She was awarded a cohort 9 grant. and she's a new project director for this program. She would like a buddy. Okay, GTAs, let's keep track of this chat box here because I think we're going to get some really good buddy matches out of this webinar. So thanks, Emma, and everybody to be in here. And then Carrie said she's excited to get a buddy. These buddy matches, I've been with Native Connections right from cohort 1, and I can't tell you how important or invaluable these buddy matches are because they really do provide you with an opportunity to talk to somebody else that's having the same issues you're having. Sometimes on these bigger, venues like today on a webinar, you probably are not going to want to talk about a specific issue that you might be facing. But with your buddy, you can do that on a phone call, on a Zoom call together. So you can work through these challenges and figure out what worked for them. Maybe that'll work for you. Or together you can come up with a solution that will help you move forward. I had some buddies that really got so connected with each other that they would travel and go visit each other. I've had Alaskan grantees buddy up with some of the lower 49 grantees that have actually come down to the lower 48 and went and visited their sites and really made some amazing connections and that moved both programs forward so much. So there's so much possibilities in these buddy matches that I'd really, you are all going to be buddy matched. If you don't already have one, talk. And again, for the GTAs, look at this chat box and let's get your grantees buddied up with somebody. So thank you everybody for responding to this question. This is one of our most important questions, I think, in this webinar.
Thank you, Deborah. Next slide. So recruiting and engaging partners. So when you think about this, what are the lessons you've learned? You can always refer back to the toolkit, and there are fact sheets that can help you with these for the advisory boards, for youth boards, on the NC-SAM dashboard. You can always refer to those. Do any of our GTAs on the call have any examples on what they've done to recruit community members, youth, and engaging them in the planning?
Elma, I would just like to add something briefly. And I was thinking about one of my grantees who I really enjoy working with them. And I believe that when they completed their community readiness model and received their score, community readiness model assessment and received their scores, they learned that the community's knowledge of their efforts was lower than what they thought. And so what I liked about my grantee, what I admired is that they were, open to that feedback and willing to say to themselves, talk amongst themselves that, well, we need to look at this differently. And so we need to do some things differently to recruit participants and community members. And so they just started with their social media platforms that they used. And this was kind of like in the middle of the pandemic, I think. So it's a little bit different, but they started using different forms of social media. And I know that I have a grantee who lives in a smaller area, but he does different things like he has a billboard and does PSAs on the radio and has his youth involved. They'll be making kind of like commercials pretty soon. And so, or also PSAs. And so I just think that it's really the tools that we're providing, that if you use them, then they're just helpful in ways that you probably can't think about or you can't really imagine when you're new to this program. It may seem like a lot, but it'll all come together.
Yeah, thank you, Sharon. Those are some great examples that you can use as a returning Gardner grantee.
Elma,
Hey,
I'm not seeing anything in the chat box, but some of the obvious outreach options are schools. That's where the youth are, to reach out to the elementary, middle, and high schools. The local spiritual gatherings, churches. There might be an existing Boys and Girls Club that already is happening. Great outreach. One of the non-obvious possible partners would include law enforcement. they're often looking for a venue to reach youth so that they are seen in a better light. The court systems, business community, there are so many folks out there that have a little bit of extra time that they could really get involved with young people. So kind of look at in the unobvious areas. Thanks, Elma.
Thanks, Sarah. Next slide. So our next slide is talking about engagement, and please feel free to answer in the chat box. Why is it important to engage your community members? You know, how are you doing in your planning? Is there anything you can tell us about your planning? And so some of the some examples that Sarah had shown us or given us was, you know, behavioral health, boys and girls clubs. But we also have to think about our parents and our grandparents, schools, you know, and some of the things that we can get them to attend. We all know that food is a big draw for communities. That is where your partners can come in. This is where you can refer to your CRM. Who are your partners in your CRM and your CSA? Who is willing to assist you? Look at those partners and ask them to sponsor a dinner or a raffle item for your community gatherings. You can also rely heavily on your advisory boards. Maybe they can be helpful to reach out to for help with providing incentives as well. And that last bullet point, who you shouldn't invite. This can be a sensitive topic, but it is important to put boundaries in place to ensure the safety of your community. A lot of NC programs and events target youth, and so maybe you have to look to see if there are any known sex or violent offenders who have been participating. And this is where another community partner, your SORNA program, can come in, because SORNA offices have all the information of all known offenders in your area. So that would be another good community partner you can partner up with.
Elma, this is Sarah. One of the things that program directors and coordinators might want to think about is to reach out to folks at Tribal Council, look at the tribe's policy, and to see if there's a policy for people who work with youth under 18, if they have to have a background check before they're hired. That's something else to consider.
Thank you. That is important for all programs involving youth, background checks if those are needed. So just keep those in mind when you're doing your events and doing projects and program implementation in your community. Is there anything in the chat box?
No, we're good.
All right, next slide. Developing strong and diverse partnerships. What are some of the partnerships you've developed that have really helped your program? Keep in mind the big overarching theme of Native Connections is to increase community capacity. You do that by developing strong partnerships within your community. This is where you can revert back to your CSA and CRM. This 4-part webinar series is all tied together, and it helps you see the implementation of everything that you can do, that you do is connected and important. We also talk about sustainability. Elwood, can you talk a little bit more about this?
Sure. So our strong and diverse partnerships can help us with the sustainability. There's times where some of the events, maybe that our funds are not able to be used for certain items that the community members have asked for at different events. But I think even going long term, this is going to help with securing more funding to extend the journey or the life of the journey for our efforts, whether it's more grant funding or corporate sponsorships or donations, depending on your organization structure. But I think it also strengthens grant applications. It helps us, I guess, cast a broader umbrella on the community and provide more things to those that we're trying to serve. Any questions on it, feel free to put them in the chat. It helps us maximize our budget too. And I don't know that sometimes we spend enough time doing that.
Okay.
And utilizing the CSA, we're able to see which departments and partners are contributing. So, reflect back to that, update that with the activities. And it'll help us give us more opportunities to increase collaboration efforts with our partnerships beyond just once a year or once every couple of years. All right, Sarah, I see it. Native Connections is about making Native connections at every level, at every opportunity. Elma, I'm gonna
Thank you
turn it
so
back
much.
over to you.
Thank you so
Oh,
much,
so-
Elwood, and thank
sorry.
you.
Sorry, Alma, this is BC. Sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to note Amy Edstrom's comment about Native Connections being for the community. So folks need to be very involved as it affects them directly. Diversity represents every community. I think we all know that. So Native Connections is there to help them. So didn't want to miss that. Thank you, Amy, for commenting there.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, BC. I appreciate that. There's nothing else in the chat box. We can go on to the next slide. Is there any questions or closing comments in regards to this part 3 in our 4-part webinar series? And I think it's already been reiterated plenty of times, but just keep in mind how powerful your community is, and that if you continue to reach out to them, encourage them and support them, they will do the same for you.
I think just one thing to remind everybody that at the top of the chat box, we did put some documents in there for you to download. One of them is our community engagement toolkit, which just has some helpful ideas in there. So I'd encourage you to download that, and the logic model template. And there's 3 other ones in there also that I think would be helpful to you. So if you haven't already downloaded those, and please do that. And you can always ask your GTA for copies of those also. And thank you.
Next slide. Okay, so some of our upcoming webinars, this is a 3rd-part webinar in our 4-part series on March 4th, or March 12th, we will be concluding the series with part 4. In that webinar, you'll be able to demonstrate how evaluation guides our journey, describe how outcomes mirror objectives, explain how data collection plays a supporting role. So please join us for our next webinar, which will conclude this series. And so please register and join us. The Native Wellness through Traditional Games will be on April 9th, and the Cyber Security and Bullying will be on April 30th. Those are all some very useful webinars upcoming to help you with your Native Connections grant. So I hope you all join us.
Hey, Elma, I have one more comment to make before we end. I just wanted to do a shout out to Sharon today and wish her happy birthday. So happy birthday, Sharon. I would sing to you, but I don't want to do that on Zoom.
Thank you. Then it would be on mine forever.
Yeah.
What was that?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next slide. And so again, thank you all for joining us. Thank you for giving us your time. We hope that this webinar has been useful and will be a good resource for you in the future. We appreciate you.
Okay.
BC.
So this is BC again. We're wrapping it up, but thank you, as I almost said, for joining us. We look forward to seeing you in the next session. And I invite our team, our presentation team, excuse me, to stay on the line, and we'll have a little chat. Thank you.
And we'll sing happy birthday.